You'll notice immediately that the Air Marshal being a pilot has got a room full of books, and the Air Commodore being a navigator has got a room full of pictures. That sort of starts to explain the difference between the two types of characters that flew the aeroplane. I just looked out the window for the majority of the time.
So hi, so my name is Greg Bagwell. I joined the Air Force in 1981. That's 1981, quite a long time ago, as a youngster, clearly. I went through the ranks over the many years that I was in. I was in about 36 years in the end, but I started as a Tornado pilot in, when did I first start flying the aeroplane? 1984, if I remember rightly. And then had 3 tours on the Tornado, first on 31 Squadron, then 17 Squadron, and then 9 Squadron. I did a little bit in between that, flying with the Canadians, working in various desk jobs and boring stuff like that. But those are my Tornado flying tours. And then ultimately, when Dina and I were much more closely together, when I was station commander at Marham, looking after the Tornado. So I wasn't on a squadron then, but I used to steal flying hours, which was the station commander's privilege. It was pretty revolutionary. I mean, I was quite lucky in that I joined as a youngster, so it was my first frontline aeroplane. A lot of the people on the Tornado force at the time had come from the Jaguar, the Buccaneer, the Lightning, the Vulcan, and it was actually more telling listening to them because they did appreciate how advanced it was compared to what they were used to. So it had a computer on board. That was a big deal. It was a 64K computer, but that was a big deal in the 1980s. It had fly-by-wire system. That really was quite revolutionary in the 80s. We actually had a mechanical backup, but a fly-by-wire system. We had terrain following radar, so you could fly hands off at very low level, in cloud or in the dark. Those were probably the most unique sort of innovations, if you like, and for some they were cutting edge at the time. Now they're kind of seen as sort of fairly basic requirements. But even the terrain following radar, that is something quite a lot of airplanes still can't do. You wouldn't catch an F-35 or a Typhoon flying 200 feet hands off in the Welsh valleys in the dark, I can assure you. So yeah, it did some pretty neat things that really haven't been repeated. So quite impressive. It got upgraded. It was started off as a GR1 and then became the GR4 when they added in effectively a data bus system into the aeroplane, which is the way it's wired to talk to its weapons, a forward-looking infrared, and some new navigation kit and a little bit of an upgrade. And after that, there was some more stuff put in it. So the cockpit, actually, to be fair, the front cockpit actually looks pretty much the same when it retired as it did when it started. They didn't do a lot of exciting stuff in the front. All the exciting stuff was in the back cockpit, where they changed the screens and the displays and the way that the aeroplane could be operated. That might be an unfair comparison. To be honest, it depends. It depends how you compare. You know, if you were to drive a family saloon and a Ferrari, you would clearly like the Ferrari for all sorts of reasons. But if you had a family of 3, the Ferrari would be pretty useless. And I think that's what the Tornado was so good at. It had a very stable platform. It was a very stable platform. It had a good weapons configuration. It was fast. It would go a long way. It was survivable. So as an aeroplane to do, you know, operational tasking, it was impressive. If you wanted to do an air show in it was less impressive. It was not, you know, it was not a very agile or very far or very, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of, a very agile platform that was able to do all the stunts that we know and love on things like Typhoons, etc. So the F-18 for me was a lovely aeroplane to fly. It was very easy to operate, and it was well designed. But I think, you know, my heart still sits with the Tornado as a platform. It was a great platform to do our job of work, which, whether we like it or not, is to do operational tasking. And we certainly did plenty of it. I mean, that aeroplane was deployed in operational scenarios for at least 25 years, and you could argue, if you count the Cold War as an operational tour, then pretty much for its entire life. That's unique in the Air Force. No other platform has done that long a stint on operational tours.
I'm Dean Andrew. I'm a navigator by training. I joined the Air Force in 1985, which also reflects my age. And I served on, in order, 9 Squadron, then went and did some work with the Harrier in the UK, and then came back to 9 Squadron. Then I did an exchange tour, just as the Air Marshal had done, but mine wasn't with the Canadians, it was with the Germans, and it was also on Tornado. And then I came back to 31 Squadron and then did a second tour on 31 Squadron. So I did 5 Tornado tours, which has symmetrically split, 2 on 9, 1 with the Germans and 2 on 31 Squadron. I got a total of 3,200 hours on the Tornado. The times that I was not flying, again, as the Air Marshal said, I was on ground tours, various, and working in headquarters, various, to fill the time between flying slots. Yeah, I mean, I was given a sneak preview of this question before we started, which is, and it made me think quite a bit about the initial days when I started flying on the Tornado GR1. First of all, when you go through navigator training, that was effectively teaching you to fly aeroplanes like the Shackleton, which was still in service. So it was very much stopwatch and compass and maps and charts with rulers. So the Tornado, even with its even in the GR1 days, was still very much an advanced aeroplane as far as a navigator was concerned. In hindsight, it wasn't particularly advanced compared to what we have technology-wise today. But when I first started flying it, I would say that the brains of the aeroplane were not necessarily in that 64K computer that were in the back of the aeroplane, rather in the way in which software was being introduced into the planning process. So my memories of the Tornado at first were sorties that would last for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Some of the photos you showed in your clip have got Tornado without fuel tanks on, so about an hour and a half. But a planning process that supported that of about 3 hours, because we would use very early entry software to do things that navigators previously had done with a pencil and a map and a ruler. So that was the first thing that I remember, time consuming with the software and loading the computer in the aeroplane with what was an old music cassette, if you like, but a cassette that you would load in the computer in the planning room and take to the aeroplane. Once you actually got into the aeroplane, it was fairly limited what you could change from your plan. It was you could move a few things, you could amend it if you like, but you couldn't really redo everything from scratch in the aeroplane. Those are the big memories that I had, and the requirement to coordinate formations was an art in itself, and navigators would spend hours and hours and hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, planning a 4-ship sortie, particularly if you were going to employ some of those unique capabilities that the Air Marshal mentioned, such as your terrain following, flying in cloud at night, in order to have your deconfliction between yourself, let alone aeroplanes from other formations, would take an awful long time. So I would say the first thing I remember about the Tornado was the amount of time that you'd spend in the planning room in order to put a good sortie together. And then as technology came on board and we had the upgrades, and we went from GR1 with the upgrade into GR4, and I was very fortunate that my German exchange tour, I flew some of the later versions of Tornado to come off of the production line. And if I was to describe the software, it was an electronic countermeasures Tornado, which flew with a radar seeker and some anti-radiation missiles on board. I would say that was more of a GR3, if there was such a thing, somewhere in between a GR1 and a GR4. So I did a software upgrade to go and fly the German Tornado. And when I came back to the Royal Air Force after that exchange, we'd upgraded to the GR4. And then you had an aeroplane that you loaded with a brick, if you like, almost with a what's the word I'm looking for? Like with a data stick, although it looked more like a brick, which is why we called it that, than a data stick. And it did allow you, the software that we had then did allow us to amend routes in the air, to load parallel missions, to understand what the airplane next to you was doing by loading his map over the top of it, and to give you an increased flexibility and increased situational awareness. All the time the Tornado was in service, there was an organization called TISMIT, which I think stands for Tornado In-Service Software Management or Maintenance Team. And they were designing software all the time to improve the capability. As new software came onto the market in the civilian world, we'd take the best of that and put it into our planning and into our airplane. A completely different airplane when I left as to the one that I'd first flown in 1987. The one thing you need to appreciate here is that Baggers was the Air Marshal is a very, very competent pilot, but also with the capacity and as an instructor to sit in the back seat and do many of the functions that navigators would do whilst he was instructing pilots to fly the airplane in a two-seater. So he's got an advantage because no one in his right mind would have let me do the other. Do the reverse, which would be to sit in the front seat and instruct navigators. So I always, when I describe the Tornado, and I don't know whether this is fair on the majority of Tornado navigators, but I don't think that the Tornado was a very difficult aeroplane to operate and do the basic function. It was a user-friendly aeroplane. As I mentioned, the software was always good to use. It was always been updated. It always made sense. You'd always push the buttons in a sort of sensible order, even though there were always lots of buttons to push. It was always easy to get by, but you really would be able to tell a crew that had gelled, that could fly the aeroplane almost without talking to each other, almost by understanding where the aeroplane was in time and space and doing the things that needed to be done without actually needing to communicate with each other, because you'd flown that often. You knew where people's traits were. I'm thinking of a situation now where I was on a GR4 and I'm in the north of Newcastle, between Newcastle and Edinburgh, at night, being attacked by some F3s. And the pilot in front, well, obviously because I'm sitting in the back, but the pilot realizes that we're off track and immediately tells me to change some software, to change the steering in the back on a particular screen on the computer, even though he is flying at 250 feet on the goggles at night. Such was his understanding of the situation, but also understanding where I was in my space, what I was doing at the time, that he was able to sort of control my hands to the right part and what was required. That is something that only comes by flying repeatedly with the same type of person, with the same person if you can. So what I would say is an easy aeroplane to operate, but if you wanted to get the most out of it, you needed to build that bond from the back seat to the front. And I have flown with some very, very, very poor pilots that needed a lot of work to build that relationship. I'll stop there.
Yeah, it's. I was just thinking as Dina was talking, first time I've really sort of put my head into it, is that the Tornado was very much designed to be operated by two people, effectively giving them different tasks, which then had to be sort of fused together. If you look at something like an F-18 or an F-15, which have now got, in fact, now are effectively survived by two-seat versions, because it's become important actually sometimes to have those two brains working as one. And the F-18 and the F-15 two-seat models actually have quite a lot of repetition of the information in the back seat, in the front seat. So actually, two people can talk about the shared information and effectively make decisions between them, and then change the way they share the load. The big difference in the Tornado was there were lots of buttons that I couldn't touch or get anywhere near in the front. You know, I couldn't interfere with the weapon selection, the navigation selection. I could look at a map and I could look out the window and I could look at weapon aiming, but there were so many things that had to be done in the back and vice versa that could only be done in the front, not in the back. So it really, it was like, if you imagine, I'm trying to think of an analogy. If you think of a rally car when it's operating at full pelt, you've got somebody sat in the passenger seat who's talking about what to do next, where to go on the corners, and somebody in the driver's seat who's doing the driving. That's a little bit how a Tornado was operated, and there was total trust and total recognition of exactly where each other are in terms of the information they need at the right time. And that was the true trick. If you had a crew that operated really, really well together, then you actually had a crew that worked better than most, because they instinctively knew what the other person needed, or when they were being sort of maxed out, if you like, in terms of capacity. The slight challenge with the Tornado is the rally car analogy doesn't quite work, because actually in a Tornado, compared to a rally car, the pilot would have the steering wheel, the navigator would have the gear stick, and the console buttons, and so you'd end up almost having to coordinate physical movements as well as thinking. So when the Tornado was operated well, it was superb, because the crew were able to basically increase the capacity of the platform, and you could do things that single-seat aircraft couldn't do. When it was operated badly, it really struggled, because one person couldn't carry it off on their own. You could try, but quite frankly, it would always doomed for failure. So yeah, it needed to be operated by two people working very, very closely together. Yeah. And that's why we left our crews. We very carefully selected crews who got on together, who operated well together. And it was always quite a wrench when you split a crew up. And you probably did that, not because they weren't necessarily working well together, but they needed to move on to bring on a young pilot and a young navigator to then create a new crew and learn new lessons. So it's probably worthy of a greater study, actually, that operating as a two-seat environment was actually quite an art form, even more different than a multi-cockpit, like in a Hercules or a Vulcan, even, where you could see each other. You know, you could look each other in the eye, you could look at body language, you saw their hands moving. In a twin-seat aeroplane where you're front and back, you really can't see each other, what each other's doing. So you're really having to do it almost by thought rather than by observation. Yeah. So yeah, it was a fascinating relationship between the two. Oh, blimey. I thought you were going to say memorable moments with Dino. I was getting mentally ready for that one. I mean, there are so many incredible memories. You sometimes there are so many you almost forget them, and actually you sometimes, there's moments like this when we sit down with you. And you've obviously got your own enthusiasm about the aeroplane and the era, and suddenly we get a chance to talk about it to a different audience. You suddenly start to appreciate that what you actually did was always quite special. Just going into work on a Monday morning and going flying and going above the cloud and seeing the sun and coming back and racing around at 500 miles an hour. You know, every day, every trip was uniquely special. And obviously, however, you then have highlights over and above that. And I think Dino would probably agree with me, but I'm not going to answer for him. But the moments when you deployed as a team, when you did something particularly either difficult or dangerous, particularly in an operational environment, where you came back as a team of maybe 4 aircraft, so 8 people, where everything worked exactly as you wanted it to, and even when there were changes on the plan, you were able to adapt. So yeah, I think those moments, whether they were over the skies of Iraq or Kosovo and Serbia, you know, they were all quite special moments because they really bring a bond together of the team. But we had some incredible training as well, whether it was in the States, flying on exercises like Red Flag. I think one of the last exercises I ever went on actually was with Dino to Utah, to Hill Air Force Base, where we were flying over the Salt Lakes there doing training. You know, some incredible memories of going to some wonderful places and doing some pretty neat stuff that we try not to tell the taxpayer too much, because they might make us pay for it all back.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question, and I've got an answer that I'll give you in a moment about flying. But if you link back to the question you asked us about crews and how well we got on, one of the things we did to make sure that crews operated well in the air is we put crews we took them away. We were away from home often, as the Air Marshal just said, and I'm thinking now about how we went to visit the Mormon Tabernacle while we were in Salt Lake City, and the laughs that you can have when you're together, building bonds of trust between people outside of the cockpit, which then transfers into the cockpit. We did so many of those things. You know, the Air Marshal led me when he was a squadron commander. I was a flight commander on a different squadron. We put together a composite team to go to Corsica to fight the back end of the Kosovo war, and he was leading the push there. And some of the things we did then were really memorable. You know, not just the flying, which was intense, but the bonding that you did outside of the flying to make sure that you looked after each other when you're in there. So I'll mention that. But one moment when you said what memorable, what have you got as a memory? I think it links all together for me, and it's this one moment when we were flying the Kosovo campaign. When we started, we flew from Royal Air Force Bruggen, which I think was a surprise to everybody, that we'd been given permission to fly combat sorties out of Germany. But the Kosovo war started right at the time when the Czech Republic and Hungary were just about to join NATO, and they weren't in NATO at the beginning of the war. So we had to enter into the former Yugoslavia through the south, through the southern bit of Italy, rather than go in through the north. And the flights were long; they were 6-7 hours long. And on one of the first sorties, I'd just finished my exchange with the German Air Force. I was flying with a guy called Tim Simpson, who's best man at his wedding, as a guy who had transferred from the Tornado and was then flying VC-10s. And we were sitting in a 6-ship of British Tornadoes, sitting behind a tanker, when a 4-ship of German Tornadoes from my old squadron pitched upon the wing to be the next on the tanker. And I remember saying to Tim, do you realize here we are at the bottom of the Adriatic, about to go and do some business over the former Yugoslavia, and there are 11 airplanes here, and I know the pilots and the crews in every single one of them, even though they come from, with exchange officers, probably 5 or 6 different countries. And we were in the, you know, the southern bit of Italy, close to Corfu, down the bottom end there. And I just thought, what an amazing world we are, what an amazing job we've got, what a fantastic opportunity we've got to do, you know, use technology together. So that I think that's my overriding memory, that we actually, at the end of the day, we're in our Tornadoes to try and be a force for good for the world, to do the right things, you know, over war zones, or try and create peace. So that's my strongest memory, spontaneously. Yeah, I've got two answers to it, if I can, and they're quite distinct, and they're quite clear. It shows you a difference in mindset. So the first one is when I was in exchange with the German Air Force. The German Air Force had a different attitude towards flying than I'd grown up with and had instilled in me. And I remember being taken aside by the squadron boss. I was a flight lieutenant at the time. And he took me aside and he said, we know you're a strong navigator. What he really meant was, you'd got a lot of hours on the jet. It didn't necessarily mean to say I was particularly good, but I had a lot of experience. And they had a pilot who was, to his words, he was a bit dodgy, and they wanted to crew him with somebody that would teach him a thing or two. And I was given a list of things that this chap was allowed to do, and he wasn't allowed to do, and I had to go and fly with him. And the hairs start sort of picking up on the back of your neck when you hear that he's not allowed to fly within a kilometre of another aeroplane because he's not very good at formation, and he's only allowed to do straight in approaches because he's not very good at turning, and you think, wow, this guy I'm sure shouldn't be flying the aeroplane. Anyway, we went from Bavaria in the south of Germany to we stopped for lunch, refueled, and on the way back on the runway, this guy had a burner blowout. His afterburner on one of the engines dropped out, or it didn't light. I can't remember. And the guy, well beyond the minimum, the maximum speed to abort, decided he was going to abort. And all I did was swear at him. And we were in a trainer, meaning we had the throttles in the back as well. And I remember slamming the throttles forward with the single burner that we had, because we were just going to be ejecting off the end of the runway because we had no distance left. And we managed to get airborne on two engines, but only one in the burner. And I couldn't believe how fortunate I had been on that particular day. And one of the maybe 3 or 4% of all my Tornado flights, I'd been in a trainer. And that particular day was the most frightening experience I'd had in the jet. And the second experience that was bad was a particular day, the 25th of May, 1999, when the Serbian army, or whoever it was who operated their weapons, decided to have a bit of cannon practice with surface-to-air missiles against the formation that I was in, and we ended up being shot at and barely surviving, being very, very low over Belgrade, and only just getting back at, and that was as a formation. Wasn't frightened at the time because we were trying to save our skin, but in hindsight, after we got back home and gone to the mess where Malcolm was probably serving bacon butties, sitting back and realised what had just happened, I think in hindsight was probably the closest I've ever come to not being here anymore. So those are the two. So one in peacetime and one in wartime experiences.
Oh, I thought I was going to get away with it. What's my scariest moment?
Yeah, that's right, sir.
I mean, this is probably going to surprise you. I don't remember ever, a bit like Dino just described there, I don't remember being scared in an aeroplane at the time. I did some things that in hindsight you look back on and go, God, that was a bit close. Like Dino, I've been shot at on the occasional moment. Obviously they missed. I've ejected out of a Hawk at Swansea Airport a long, long time ago. And I've nearly hit other airplanes that were that neither of us saw. It was a Phantom in all places in the Lake District, would you believe? But none of those actually were my scariest moments. You kind of roll with the punches a little bit, and you almost, it's a bit like being a Formula One racing driver. You know, if you're scared, you don't get back in the cockpit. You find a way to cope with it. So my scariest moment in the Air Force, which was the question, I was reminded the other day on Twitter that this is the 10th year of the retirement of the Harrier. It was literally, I think the 15th of December 2010 was its final flight, and I was the AOC of one group at the time, and whether I did this deliberately or not, I found out that I was going to be on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph because I had said that the numbers of squadrons that we were going to be reduced to was a little low. It wasn't quite what I'd said. In fact, in the end, the quote was that I'd said we were going to be smaller than Belgium. That's not quite what I said, but I think at that moment I realised that the politicians were after me, the Chief of the Defence Staff was after me, and I was probably going to get in quite a lot of trouble. So I was probably at my most scared then because I thought I was probably going to lose my job. But actually, even now, I'm glad I said what I said at the time, because although it didn't come out the way I would have wanted to have said it, you can't control journalists. But actually, and I think if I recall, actually, I know Dino's had one of these moments in his career when you say something that is true, but perhaps others would rather you didn't say it. But actually, being true to yourself isn't really scary. Actually, it's the right thing to do, even if sometimes it gets you into more trouble than you do. So it probably was my scariest moment in some respects, but actually one of those moments that I can hold my head up high and say, well, I said what needed to be said at the time and nobody else said it. And you are now seeing money being pumped into defence to correct some of those, shall we say, slightly poor decisions that were made at a time when money was tight. But there you go. So yeah, sometimes it isn't, you know, courage isn't always just about jumping in an aeroplane and doing brave stuff and being shot at. Of course, that requires courage. Sometimes courage is being true to yourself, true to your men and women that work for you, and standing up for things that might be quite scary, but actually are the right thing to do. So yeah, maybe I drifted a bit away from scary, but yeah, those are the moments I think that really make you stand up and count. Dino might not say this, but he might actually. I remember when he took over a squadron that was having some difficulties, and he had the courage to make some difficult decisions and take a certain path. And I think deep down he might say that was pretty scary, because you're looking after the livelihoods of 150 men and women, and you know, those moments sometimes really do test your leadership and your courage.
If I can move in here, because I know I've given a presentation already where you've sort of segued into a question that I was asked when I gave my my Air Cadet to, you know, Air Commodore brief to the squadron, and because I know you've asked us you know, to talk about not just about flying, and the Air Marshals brought out a great point that we spoke about when I did that from Bruff to Bruggen presentation, and that was about the camaraderie, and he used 2 points there to which I can now link back when you were talking about what was it like working as a crew. How did a good crew work? Well, you can probably tell from the banter that we're throwing at each other that we know each other really well. You can also tell from the two things that he's just mentioned that, you know, he's always senior to me. And he always had my back. When I was in trouble, he always had my back. So that when I was the squadron commander and I had to make those difficult decisions, he was my station commander, and I knew that I could make those tough decisions because I had the support of the person that was directly in charge of me, and that gives you confidence to do the right thing because you know the organisation is not corrupt. You know that you're not having to do stuff for your boss because you do stuff that you think the boss wants you to do. You know that the boss trusts you to do that, and that happened when I was at Marham and he was my station commander. But the other thing that is the mark of the sort of camaraderie that you build between two people is when I did get into trouble with the press, which was a while after, well, actually a few years, but not that long after the Air Marshal was a 2-star when he made his comment to the Telegraph, and I was a 1-star when I made my comment also to a bunch of pressmen. And I was in a bad place. I was in a bad place with the hierarchy of the Royal Air Force because I'd said some truths that needed to be said. It was the Air Marshal that got on the telephone and called me and said, "Don't worry about it. Everything will be all right. You did the right thing. Be true to yourself." He was the person that phoned up as a friend, and that friendship had been built because we'd flown the same aeroplane in the same era, in the same place, in the same. So that's what the Royal Air Force brings to you. For those that will listen to this, that are wondering, you know, we've only got single-seat aeroplanes now, if you like, with F-35 and Typhoon, if they're interested in fast jets. But that camaraderie will still exist, and that brother, you know, that mateship and that team spirit, that esprit de corps, will still exist because it's about shared experiences. So I hope that helps embellish that question a little bit and link back to that presentation I gave before, guys. I was once based at Royal Air Force Wittering, and I was in the bar one day, at night. And for those of you that know the bar at Royal Air Force Wittering, on a Monday, nobody went into the bar. And I was by myself. And Wittering is an old V-Force base. And the men's toilets were about 800 meters away from the bar. The ladies' toilets were about 8 meters away from the bar. And I decided, as most people did midweek, that we would use the ladies' toilets rather than the men's toilets because we needed to get back to our beer as quickly as we could. But on this particular occasion, what I hadn't realized is that they were preparing the mess for a ladies' guest night the following night. And the station commander and my bosses, the wing commander's wife, were in there decorating and putting flowers in. And I heard the door of the ladies' toilet open behind me, and I thought, oh no. So I stood on the toilet seat in the hope that they wouldn't see my feet if they looked, which they did. They looked, and I heard them whispering to each other that there was somebody in flying boots stood on the toilet. And I panicked. I climbed out the back of the window, which led into the courtyard, ran up the stairs, and I knew that the stairs led to the VIP room. In the VIP room at the time was I think a 4-star. He might have been a 3-star, but he was a senior officer who had a reputation that nobody would mention his surname. He was known as the B. Everyone knew him as the B word, and he was staying in the room. And I had to crawl behind his sofa with him watching TV to get out of the VIP room, to get back into the main body of the mess. And I walked down the stairs of the mess towards the bar when I met the two ladies who had just been looking under the door of the toilet, who looked up and said, Dean, it's great you're here. We need your help. We think there's a man in the ladies' toilets we'd like you to get out. And I kept that story quiet from them for about 10 years, but I've since told them that I was, in fact, the person that they'd seen in the toilet. And I'd escaped the B word watching TV by crawling behind his seat and managed to get away with it as a hero when I had, in fact, caused all the trouble in the first place.
I'd never heard that story before, and I haven't been able to think of my story on the basis that I am still imagining Dino crawling behind the good officer Bagwell's chair. My goodness me. How do you follow that? I'll tell you a flying story, and it's only a short one, but to this day I can still picture it. And Dino knows this individual. This gentleman was called Gary Bruff. I think he might still be in the Air Force. I think he might have just retired, so hopefully I'm not getting him in too much trouble. Bruffy, as he was known, was before he joined the Air Force was a blue coat at Butlins, because he was the sort of character that could literally do a stand-up routine unprompted for hours and keep the entire audience amused. He was an incredibly funny guy, and quite something. Anyway, on this particular day, we were flying in Nevada, in Las Vegas, flying onto the ranges at Nellis to do an exercise red flag. And at the beginning of the exercise, you have to do a familiarization sortie where you just go in as a pair and fly around the area just to get a sense of it, so that when you next do it, when it's all a bit more exciting, you've sort of had your first trip and you've experienced getting in and getting out. So we took off as two separate aeroplanes. Bruffy would have been probably 20, 30 seconds behind me. And we start climbing up to go into the area. And Bruffy's quite a long way away, but starts to come in and is clearly going to join on my wing. And I can't, for the life of me, work out why he's about to join on the wing. But he is doing it because he, as it turns out, has got something he wants to show me. Eventually, Bruffy gets closer and closer and closer. I'm looking across at him and I'm trying to work out what the hell's going on. And as he gets closer, I realise, and this would have been about, I don't know, late 80s. So when did Star Wars first come out? Somewhere, whether it was Star Wars 1 or 2. Bruffy has taken off his helmet and has put on his head a full Yoda mask. So I have now got a tornado formating on me as Yoda. And I to this day still can't believe he did it. I sort of waved him away and he went off, and I don't know whether he took the mask off later or not. I presume he did. But he then spent the entire 2 weeks wearing that mask whenever he wasn't doing something he shouldn't be. And I remember him swimming in the pool with it, coming down to breakfast with it. The guy was a nutter. But yeah, being formated on by Yoda was probably one of my funniest flying moments. I can still picture it. Quite simply, if you think it's for you, do it. You know, there's lots of reasons why people, aren't sure about what they want to do in life. And, I'm trying to imagine how I felt as a 15, 16, 17-year-old making decisions. But I look back on it now and have got no regrets. I would do it again in a heartbeat, whether it would have been for a short career or a long career. Everything I did, I enjoyed. And you've still got time to have a second career, go do other things. So the simple advice is do it. But if you do choose to do it, just put your heart and soul into it. Be true to yourself. Be true to the men and women you work for, or even end up leading or commanding, and you will have a superb time. But already what you've learned in the cadets will stand you in good stead, because you'll already have learned some skills, built your confidence, seen things that will still be applicable, whatever you choose to do. But yeah, my simple advice is, if you think it's for you, then give it a go. You'll never have any regrets.
Yeah, build on that, and it's absolutely true. It is. I would not swap. Well, I'd maybe swap a couple of things, but but I would absolutely do it all again. I've had an absolute fantastic time, and I was in Hamburg last week to help my daughter move out of a flat, and we go up on the train, and I'm looking left and right at the North German countryside, and I'm looking at masts and chimneys that bring back memories of my flying around at the end of the 80s while the Cold War was still on. And yet my final tour was in Afghanistan, and right the way through it, when I look back, and I meet people that are so thankful for what the UK has contributed to their country, to the peace, to what they've done. Well, maybe we didn't realize it at the time. We were just flying aeroplanes, but the aeroplanes were there to do good in some way, shape, or form, following some political will, some political gesture. And the best times I've had have been whilst I've been on operations, because you can actually see the work that you are doing, albeit tough on the families being away from home, but working with people to make others' lives better. And if I was going to sum up what it means, it's something that happened last night when I ordered a pizza from a pizzeria in close to Rheindalen, for those of you that know where the old headquarters was. And the guy that delivers it is in my son's class, and he's from Kosovo, and his whole family is absolutely massively grateful that the Royal Air Force was part of the coalition that made their miserable life so much better by forcing the regime change that allows their country now to be free. I never looked at it before in those terms, but it is true to say I get a much larger pizza than average just because of what I've done in the past. And although that's a flippant statement at the end, I'm actually really proud of what we've contributed here to peace in the Middle East, towards peace in Afghanistan, and sorting out Kosovo. And I've been involved in all of it. So feeling that you've actually contributed something tangible, something worthwhile in your life is where I sit now, really happy that I spent my 36 years in the Royal Air Force.
Actually, that's quite an easy answer. I'll tell you what I'm most proud of is the emails and letters I got from the men and women I worked with when I left. Those are the things I treasure the most, not the medals or the awards. They're all, wonderful things to receive and bring back great memories. And of course, it's nice to have recognition, but actually deep down, it's the respect, and I'll use the word love. You know, it's small L maybe, but it is. It's the people that remember working with you and for you, who wish you well and remember the times when you work with them, and thank you for those. Those are the rewards I cherish the most.
Unfortunately, that's a really, really good answer, and I would love to have thought of it myself, and I'd like to be in that boat. Probably not quite the same number of emails as the Air Marshal got, but it's a really, really good point. And there are some people out there, again, back to that point about who you've worked with and what bonds you build because of what you go through. However, I'm in a really, really fortunate position and unique position to have awards from 2 other countries as well as from the Queen. Getting an award from the German Air Force was something that I didn't expect, and I was really proud to have been given it as the first Brit ever to get an award for flying with the Luftwaffe. I'm sure there are many that have got awards for flying against them. But I think the proudest one is the one that I got last year, this year in fact, which was totally out of the blue for me, and was recognition from the United States for all of the work that they know I've done and the contributions that I've made to helping the United States Air Force or the United States Forces through all of the operations that they've been through. And the citation that was put together had to have had someone like the Air Marshal who knows my career inside out to help write it, because it highlighted all of the things that being a force for good as part of a coalition had brought. It was about being UK and helping the US, and I'm really proud that we were able to, as a Royal Air Force officer, make such a big impact in this case to the United States, and that the President Trump authorized it, which is fortunate because he's got a reputation at the moment for taking things off people rather than giving them. So I guess that's the one that I'm proudest of at the moment.